There is no mechanism in human physiology for a chemical, a synthetic, or a pharmaceutical to reverse the course of any disease.
I was in the States for work. They were promoting some drug for depression. You listen to the side effects and it said, this may cause suicidal ideation. Explain this to me.
We have built a multi-trillion-dollar industry around symptom maintenance and disease management. We have not built a trillion-dollar industry around cure.
It would scare anyone off taking the drug, but there's enough people that do.
Sarah, literally like one day, I remember the exact tipping point. I landed a job with large life insurance, given the task to predict mortality to the month. If I inherited high blood pressure from my ancestor, can you tell me what gene they passed to me that caused that condition to exist? And you watch their face go blank, because that gene doesn't exist.
So if someone wants to work out what they're deficient in, would I go get a blood test?
You can do 4 things. It's actually not an attention deficit. It's an attention overload disorder.
Explain to us what like a whole food diet is.
If you don't know where to get it in the grocery store, that's a highly processed ingredient.
What is it with seed oils? Should we be avoiding them?
So the issue with seed oils is...
Gary, I want to know, how did you get into the work that you do?
So my undergraduate degrees are in biology. My postgraduate degrees are in human biology and neuroscience. So quite a bit of time in undergrad and graduate school studying the human body. Eventually, I wanted to go on to orthopedic school, and I decided I would take a semester off. Ended up never going back, and I got into mortality sciences, of all things. I landed a job with large life insurance, and was essentially given the task with a bunch of very smart people, other PhDs, MDs, researchers, to predict mortality to the month. Because everybody is on a mortality curve, on an actuarial curve. You're on one, I'm on one, kids are on one, our parents are on one. But when a life insurance company is getting ready to take $25 million or $50 million worth of risk on your life, they don't care where you are on an actuarial curve. They want to know your specific mortality. How many more months does this person have left on Earth? And essentially what we did was we built the model from the end point backwards. When you get too many smart people in the same room, it's kind of hard to make a decision. The one thing that we agreed on was that every human being leaves this earth the same way. We all die of exactly the same thing. It's called hypoxia, lack of oxygen to the brain. Now, we tend to think of it as an event, a gunshot wound, a Boston stroke, a heart attack. But the truth is that hypoxia is a predictable curve. Your life expectancy, your health span, and your lifespan are directly related to how well your body utilizes oxygen. Even more specifically, how well your mitochondria utilize oxygen. So we agreed on the endpoint, and we worked backwards from there. Now, mind you, this is the largest population database in the world. It had 371 million lives. And in this database, they knew the day, the date, the time, the location, and the cause of death for 371 million people. And we were able to pull that information back into the record, and then with blood work and demographic data, predict your life expectancy to the month. And I get a lot of flack for saying that, but it's some of the most accurate science in the world. I mean, if you want to know how accurate life insurance companies, annuity companies, reverse mortgages are at predicting death, just look at what happened during the 2008-2009 financial services crisis. We had 364 banks in the U.S. fail. You didn't have a single life insurance company fail. They're some of the most solvent institutions in the world. There's not another financial services enterprise anywhere on the surface of the earth that would take that much risk on a single variable. So they are very good at predicting mortality. But as I, expanded and grew in this career, I began to realize that the majority of the reason why people are not living longer, healthier, happier, more fulfilling lives are for what we called modifiable risk factors, meaning risk factors that were under the control of the patient that was submitting their records. And the sad thing was that more than 95% of them wouldn't make the dietary lifestyle changes that would have dramatically extended their life. And the second thing that became glaringly apparent was that we are not as sick or diseased or as pathological as we think we are. We are nutrient deficient. You know, if you deprive the human body of certain raw materials, you get the expression of disease. And then we go chasing the disease and not the deficiency. You see, we believe this in plant physiology, right? So if you had a leaf rotting in a palm tree and you called a true arborist, a true botanist out to your house, they wouldn't even touch the leaf, right? They would core test the soil. And they would say, you know what, Sarah, there's no nitrogen in this soil. And they would add nitrogen to the soil and the leaf would heal. Human beings are no different. If you deprive the human body of certain raw materials, you get the expression of disease. And then we want to add chemicals or synthetics or pharmaceuticals. And there is no mechanism in human physiology for a chemical, a synthetic, or a pharmaceutical to reverse the course of any disease. Which is why in 172 years, Pfizer's never cured a single disease, right? Now, I'm not anti-big pharma like a lot of my peers. I think big pharma does a lot of good for us, right? But the truth is that we have built a multi-trillion-dollar industry around symptom maintenance and disease management. We have not built a trillion-dollar industry around cure. And if we believed more in what God gave us and less in what man makes us, we would be so further ahead, meaning in terms of our health span approximating our lifespan. And then eventually, Sarah, literally like one day, I remember the exact tipping point. Because, in my career, I was legally prohibited from having any contact with the patient or any contact with the treating physician. So even if I saw life-threatening drug interactions, I could not pick up the phone and warn the patient. Wow. I couldn't even pick up the phone and call the doctor that prescribed a contraindicated medication. So, I realized that there were human beings on the other side of these spreadsheets. And it wasn't just data. And so I abruptly quit that career. And I went home. I told my girlfriend at the time, who then became my fiance, is now my wife, that I wanted to start a functional medicine practice. I actually called it lifestyle medicine practice at the time, but what I realized is that's a functional medicine practice, and that was about 10 years ago. And we found a physician in town. His name was Dr. Campamore. He was one of the largest. He had the largest anesthesiology practice in town, because I'm not licensed to practice medicine. I'm not a physician. I'm a human biologist. So I found a nurse practitioner, I found a PA, and I found a physician that would allow me to do things in a narrow scope, bring it to him, have him evaluate it, and then and he would take the risk under his license. And in about month 10, he came to our clinic and we had a sit down, and he said, Gary, I'm the longest practicing anesthesiologist in Collier County, which is in Florida. I have never in my career seen these kinds of results in my patients.
Wow.
They're getting off of thyroid medication. They're coming with Crohn's autoimmune and it's going into remission. They're off of hypertensive medication. Some of them were brittle hypertensive. Reversal of type 2 diabetes, which are chronic conditions that we consider to be permanent conditions. And then he went all in. He's since retired, but he went all in and, really helped us to formulate the foundation to build a really thriving functional medicine practice, which I recently exited. But when you go into the human body, if you look at how most people treat supplements, for example, the majority of people are supplementing for the sake of supplementing, right? They're not supplementing for deficiency. They're supplementing for the sake of supplementing because their uncle told them that resveratrol is great for your heart, or somebody told them that CoQ10 is good for your liver, or that ashwagandha is great for sleep, or St. John's wort is good for anxiety, and all of that is true. But just if we go back to the plant example for a moment, if you didn't find the nitrogen in the soil, nothing else would have mattered. right? I mean, water is great for plants. If you watered that palm tree, nothing would have happened. If you put phosphorus into the soil, nothing would have happened. If you put sulfur into the soil, nothing would have happened. Nitrogen, now the plant heals. Human beings are no different. And when you start to look at the pandemic of ADD, ADHD, OCD, manic depression, bipolar, morbid obesity, chronic disease, type 2 diabetes, mental illness, like I don't think that we have a mental illness crisis. I think we have a lack of mental fitness crisis. Um, and so, you know, what's really astounding is that if you want to see magic happen in human beings, you give their body the raw material it needs to do its job. And so essentially that was my foray into what I do now.
It's so interesting, so much to unpack there. I want to ask you, you mentioned like the mental health crisis, right? And
Mhm.
something that stood out to me and I'll never forget is I was in the States for work last year around September. And in Australia, it's illegal to advertise pharmaceutical drugs on TV. We don't have ads for it. It's not allowed. But in America, as
Not
you
here.
know, you can advertise it. But the thing that stood out to me is half the advertisement talks about the side effects. So it would be like they were promoting some drug for, I don't know, depression. And then you listen to the side effects and it said, this may cause suicidal ideation and all these other things. And I'm thinking to myself, why would you take a drug for
Oh,
depression
my
that's
favorite
going
thing
to
is
cause you
first of all,
suicidal ideation? Can you
it's
explain this to
always like
me?
grandpa pushing his granddaughter on a
Yes.
swing, and there's like a chorus singing in the background, and they're like blindness,
Yeah.
liver failure, temporary loss of bowel, and occasionally death. And you're like, wait, what? What the hell? I mean, and there's dead grandpas like, fly fishing in a lake with the kids. You're like, liver failure? Wait, what? I'm farting on an airplane. I'm not looking for my liver to fail.
It's
But
so awful that we're laughing, but it's so true. These ads are not normal. Like, if anyone has been to America and seen these ads, it just blows you away. It would scare anyone off taking the drug, but there's enough people that do. Why? Like, explain this to me.
so I'll explain it to you. One of the things that I do from the stage very often, and I'll do it when I'm in Australia, is I say I will take any ailment that you or a loved one suffers from, whether it's an autoimmune condition, whether it's a mental illness, ADD, ADHD, OCD, manic depression, more, rampant anxiety, depression, um, whether it's Hashimoto's, Crohn's, and I will tell you exactly what raw material is missing from their body that is causing that condition to exist.
Wow.
Because we have accepted some very broad fallacies in modern medicine. So, for example, if you are a 45-year-old male or female, let's say, and you go into your doctor's office one day and they take your blood pressure and they're like, oh my goodness, Sarah, you have hypertension. We're going to monitor your blood pressure over the next few weeks and just see if this is a one-time thing. And they start monitoring it and they go, wow, Sarah, your blood pressure has been elevated over this period of time. You have hypertension. So you come in, you do a full cardiac workup. Everything's normal. Your EKG is normal, EEG is normal, heart sounds normal, lung sounds. Maybe they do a cardiac cath, a dye contrast study, a CT angio. Everything's normal. They can't figure out why your blood pressure is high, which is 85% of all hypertensive diagnoses. You can Google this. Just Google the percentage of what's called essential or primary hypertension that's idiopathic of unknown origin. It's 85%. So what do? We medicate the heart anyway. We medicate the heart for a crime it's not committing. We hit it with beta blockers, calcium channel blockers, diuretics. We do the same thing if your thyroid is off. You have low thyroid hormone T3, and they go, Sarah, you have hypothyroid. We're gonna medicate the thyroid, and we could just go through dozens of these. And then when they don't have an explanation, they're going to say, well, let's look at your family history. Oh, I see that your mom's brother had hypertension and your grandfather had hypertension on your father's side. You have what's called familial hypertension. You have genetically inherited high blood pressure. Well, if you were actually take that one step further and just look your physician in the face and say, okay, if I inherited high blood pressure from my ancestor, can you tell me what gene they passed to me that caused that condition to exist? And you watch their face go blank. because that gene doesn't exist, which means that that condition does not exist. We do not pass disease from generation to generation. In fact, the human genome is expressly designed to not pass on genetic anomalies. A few slip through very rarely, right? But this is why you have spontaneous abortion. This is why the genome has when it's called S phase arrest. But when the DNA is replicating, there's a mechanism in place to stop genetic anomalies from promulgating. But because things run in families, we assume they're genetic. Because there's a history of high blood pressure, we assume that you're inheriting high blood pressure, which is not true. What runs in families is the inability for the body to refine a raw material, which causes a deficiency, which leads to that disease. And that deficiency can be fixed. So, to be specific, in hypertension, you generally have a gene mutation called MTHFR or a gene mutation called MTRR. What these gene mutations do is they don't allow you to properly process folic acid. Okay, so you can't take the compound folic acid or folate and convert it into the usable form called methylfolate. I always use the example that we pull crude oil out of the ground, right? But you can't put crude oil into your gas tank because the car doesn't understand that fuel source. So crude oil has to be refined into gasoline. Then the car can run. In human beings, this refining process is called methylation. There is not a single compound known to mankind, not one. There is no vitamin, no mineral, no amino acid, no nutrient of any kind that we put into the human body that is used in the format that we put it in. So without exception, everything that enters our bodies goes through a process of being converted into the usable form. It gets converted from crude oil into gasoline. It gets refined into gasoline. If you can't refine that, if you can't methylate that nutrient, you have a deficiency. That deficiency leads to the expression of these diseases. So, for example, if you inherited from your offspring not high blood pressure, but the inability to break down homocysteine, which everybody has in our blood, your homocysteine level will rise. Homocysteine is a natural amino acid. It's in every human being on the planet's blood. But when it gets too high and it's cruising by the inside lining of the arteries, it irritates the artery. And if you irritate the lining of an artery, it will clamp down. And if you make the pipes smaller in a fixed system, the pressure goes up. So now, because you have, remember, you have 63,000 miles of blood vessel in your body. It doesn't take much arterial narrowing to drive pressure up. So now you're a perfectly healthy middle-aged male or female. Your homocysteine level has climbed. Your arteries have constricted. Your pressure is rising. And now you're on a medication that is holding the heart responsible for a crime that it's not committing. Instead of putting the raw material into the body that it needs to do its job, which is an amino acid called TMG, which I assume in Australia you can get it off the shelf. Yeah. You can buy it on Amazon. And now your body starts to process homocysteine because there is nothing wrong with you. You just have a nutrient deficiency. And as it processes homocysteine and homocysteine falls, the vascular system begins to relax and pressure returns to normal. I was made famous for doing this with Dana White, the president of the UFC. At the time that I met him, he was on multiple blood pressure medications, and 21 weeks later, he was on none, and his blood pressure was normal for the first time in 15 years.
Wow!
And he was also on a CPAP machine. He's no longer on a CPAP machine. He was on blood thinners. He's no longer on blood thinners. He was on multiple medications, which he's been very vocal about. I'm not disclosing any health information that I'm not allowed to. But and so when we go back to human physiology and we say, what deficiency could be causing the expression of this condition? You can look at the entire category of mental illness, rampant anxiety, for example. In the United States, statistically speaking, 64% of Americans report experiencing anxiety that is debilitating at least some point in their lifetime. 35% of people report having this as a constant debilitating condition. So if you were to ask 100 practitioners, functional medicine doctors, if you were actually ask, therapists and psychiatrists, what is anxiety? They're going to describe to you the characteristics of anxiety. They're going to tell you it is a fear of impending doom, and a sensation that something bad is going to happen. It's a rapid heart rate. It's the feeling of the presence of a fear without the presence of a fear. It's overwhelm. It's sensation of anxiousness, and it can lead to a panic attack. Okay, all that I just did was describe to you the characteristics of anxiety, but what is it? What is causing that person to feel that way? Well, anxiety is very specifically this. It is a rise in four neurotransmitters. These are called catecholamines: norepinephrine, epinephrine, ephedrine, and dopamine. When these neurotransmitters rise, they trigger a fight or flight response. So if you walked out of your studio tonight, got in your car and drove home, and when you got out of your car, somebody was standing in front of you with a knife, like a very real threat, your pupils would dilate, your heart rate would increase, your extremities would flood with blood. You would begin to have a fight or flight response. Okay, how did that happen? Your brain dumped catecholamines into the brain. And this is what made your hearing acute, and it made you ready to fight or flight. But you could also be laying in your bed tonight, in your home, safe and sound, and you could start thinking about getting eaten by a shark. And you could have the exact same reaction. One is the presence of a very real fear. One is an entirely imagined fear. They solicit the same reaction. Why is that? Because neurophysiologically, they're exactly the same thing. So now that we know that anxiety is a rise in catecholamines, the treatment should be, how do we lower catecholamines? Well, what we do is first we look at the gene that breaks down catecholamines. It's called COMT, COMT. If that gene is broken, which is genetic, then you supplement for that deficiency. What happens when that gene is broken? You need additional B vitamins, specifically pyridoxine, riboflavin, thiamine, niacin, and pantothenic acid. You need a very specific form of B12 called hydroxy or adenosylcobalamin, and you need something called methylfolate. When you put these into the body begins to downregulate catecholamines, which means it downregulates fight or flight neurotransmitters, which means that the sensation of fear is no longer present. If you were to ask 100 people that suffer from anxiety these three questions, you could find out very quickly that it's coming from a nutrient deficiency. The first question is, have you had it on and off throughout your entire lifetime? The majority of them will say yes. The second question is, can you point to the specific trigger that causes it? They'll say no. Sometimes I just get overwhelmed with anxiety. I'm at dinner with my friends, or I'm laying on the couch with my family, and I get overwhelmed. I'm driving home from work on an otherwise innocuous day, and I'm overwhelmed with anxiety. And the third question is, if you've tried anti-anxiety medications, did they work? And they'll say no, they just made me feel like a zombie. Right there, you know that you have a nutrient deficiency. A nutrient deficiency that's existed from birth because it's a gene mutation. The gene mutation is causing a deficiency, not a disease. We're treating the disease, not the deficiency. And now, that at first I was a giant charlatan for even bringing this up. I mean, I got absolutely ridiculed by the medical community, but now we've treated almost 200,000 patients and we have the data. And the truth is, magic happens to human beings when you give their body the raw material it needs to do its job.
Wow. With things like ADHD, ADD, which have been a huge rise all around the world, but very much in children, and people are saying, oh, but, when, say you and I were young, Gary, that we didn't know anyone that had that. And they're like, oh, people had it, we just didn't have a name for it. So they were, went without being diagnosed. Yeah, tell us about that. Because I feel like everyone I know, or not everyone, a lot of people I know whose kids have it, they go straight to taking some sort of drug to control it. So why do you think there's been this rise, and what is the best way to treat it?
Well, the best way to treat it is to first understand its definition, right? Um, so very often we treat things the exact opposite of how we define them. Okay, that's where we go wrong. So first, with ADD or ADHD, attention deficit disorder is actually not an attention deficit at all. It's an attention overload disorder. It's too many windows open at the same time. So in the human mind, we don't just create thought, we also break thought down. We dismantle thought. Otherwise, the thought you had at the beginning of this podcast would still be the thought in your head right now, right? And so the mind would get too clouded. So we create thought through neurotransmitters, and then we break those down by degrading those neurotransmitters. So in the mind of someone with attention deficit disorder, imagine that you're sitting in a theater, in the front row of a theater, and there's an empty stage in front of you, and an actor walks to the edge of that stage and engages you in a conversation. And while you're having that conversation, a second one walks to the front of the stage and also begins a dialogue with you. And a few minutes later, a third one, and then a fourth one, and then a fifth one. And pretty soon, the whole stage is filled with people that are engaging you in this conversation. You know that somebody's conversation is going to suffer.
Mm.
The way the mind works is, as that first actor was done asking you questions, he left the stage and the second came. So the mind degrades these thoughts and then brings the next thought forward. So attention deficit disorder is an attention overload disorder. It's too many windows open at the same time. People that have ADD or ADHD do not lack the ability to pay attention. They lack the ability to pay attention to so many things.
Mm.
And so if you have ever had ADD or ADHD, or you've known someone who's really suffered from it, they can actually hyper focus on things that they really like. You give someone with attention deficit disorder a subject that they are really passionate about, they will hyper focus on that subject. They don't lack the ability to pay attention. So modern medicine says, okay, if the mind is racing up here, let's take the central nervous system, pump it full of amphetamines so that we can race the central nervous system to match the pace of the mind. So in other words, let's take, which is Vyvanse, Adderall, Ritalin, those are amphetamines, okay, which is why they create such a dependency, a tachyphylactic response, a desensitization, they borrow from your future. So let's take the system that's not broken and let's break it to match the system that is. So it's like saying, well, the next time you get a flat tire, just get out of your car and slash your other three tires. And you'll just create equilibrium, right? So it doesn't make sense. Don't take what's not broken and break it to match what is broken.
Yeah.
So we should address this by trying to quiet the mind. So now the question becomes, how do you quiet the mind? You break down neurotransmitters. How do you break down neurotransmitters? You give the body the raw materials that it needs to catabolize, to break down neurotransmitters. And so in ADHD, if you look at the incidence of ADHD in MTHFR positive individuals, you will see that it's 85%, meaning that there is a genetic mutation called MTHFR. It's affectionately called the motherfucker gene, but that's not what it stands for. Sorry, I said that on your podcast.
No.
But it stands for methylene tetrahydrofolate reductase. It's an inability to break down folates and create the necessary nutrient that's needed to break down neurotransmitters. In 200,000 patients that came through my functional medicine clinic, I can tell you emphatically that I did not see a single patient come through that clinic that reported suffering from severe ADD, ADHD, or anxiety that did not have severe gut issues. In every single case, they reported gas, bloating, diarrhea, constipation, irritability, and cramping. Why is that? Because the same deficiency that governs the breakdown of neurotransmitters governs the motility of the gut. It governs the pace of the gut, not the gut microbiome, not food sensitivity, not food allergy, the actual pace of the conveyor belt of the gut. And if you change the speed of the gut, then you get the consequences of changing that speed, which are gas, bloating, diarrhea, constipation, irritability, cramping. These poor people suffer from anxiety, they suffer from ADD or ADHD, they suffer from severe gut issues. So what do? They go down the bandwagon of looking at their gut microbiome. They look at food sensitivities. They look at food allergies. They take all the foods that they're sensitive or allergic to out of their diet. Nothing changes because it has nothing to do with what you're eating. It has to do with the pace of the gut. And then if we look at the majority of mental illness, and I really hate that term, but let's just use it for a moment. And we say, well, what if I've ever been depressed or know somebody who's ever had severe depression? Well, we define depression as an inadequate supply of serotonin. So if you are low on serotonin, if I was magically able to stick a syringe in your arm, Sarah, and just draw out the serotonin, you would exhibit signs of depression, right? Serotonin is the main neurotransmitter of mood. So if the definition of depression is an inadequate supply of serotonin, wouldn't you think that the fix would be to raise serotonin?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's not what we do. We take people that are low on serotonin and we put them on SSRIs. We put them on selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. What these drugs do is they essentially bind to the receptor, dendritic receptor. They slow the uptake of serotonin. So essentially what it is doing is rationing what little serotonin you have. So by definition, it never raises serotonin. So by definition, it never ends depression. This is why I have talked to hundreds and hundreds of clients. They'll sit right across the desk from me and I'll say, how long have you been on an antidepressant? And they'll say, 15, 18 years. I go, great. When did you think it was going to kick in? Like, when did you think this was going to, should we run this for like another 2 years just to see how it goes? No, the reason why you're not undepressed on your antidepressant is because it's not treating the deficiency that's giving you the condition that you have. And then if we even get more basic than that, we say, well, where is serotonin made? Well, there's a factory right here in the gut that makes serotonin. 90% of the serotonin in your body, by the way, is right here. So, right there. So if you don't have it here, you can't have it here. So depression rarely begins in the outside environment. It almost always begins in the gut. And then we just take it one step further. Okay, how is it made in the gut? We take an amino acid called tryptophan, and we methylate it. That's the crude oil, and we methylate it into the neurotransmitter serotonin. That's the gasoline. Crude oil is tryptophan. The byproduct is serotonin. Then serotonin travels up the vagus nerve. It goes to the brain and it populates mood. What does it do when it gets to the brain? It creates a joy, elation, passion, arousal. It creates all of the elevated emotional states. So if I can't reach an elevated emotional state, I don't have a mental illness. I have a deficiency in the neurotransmitters that allow me to create that state. And once we start thinking like this, we go about fixing the actual root cause of the problem. And I can't even tell you how many thousands of patients I have permanently put depression, anxiety, ADD, ADHD, OCD, manic depression, bipolar into permanent remission just by fixing the nutrient deficiency in their body.
So if someone wants to work out what they're deficient in, like I'll use myself as an example, I'm not on any medication. I feel good day to day.
You take yourself. You probably eat a whole food diet.
I eat a good diet. I exercise. I meditate. I do breath work here and there, But at the same time, we can talk about that in a bit. At the same time, I do get tired. There are things that, I probably do want to work on. Would I go get a blood test? And I do something that you mentioned, I think, or I heard you mention previously, which is I sometimes take supplements because I hear they're good, not knowing if it's actually what I need. But, Thingy said from some other podcast that I should be taking God knows what.
Yeah.
The only thing I know is I'm iron deficient, but, not badly, but enough. But otherwise, there are I think I've taken zinc and things like that. What would someone like me do? to try and make sure that I live for as long as possible and as healthy as possible?
So, so there is a test that I am trying to get through the Australian authorities now. It's a once in your lifetime genetic test. I'm also trying to get the supplements approved in Australia. They're basic supplements. But until that time, um, you can do four things. Um, you can uh, in the mornings, you want to make sure that you hydrate and mineralize the body. My favorite way, so many of us are deficient in in minerals. There are 91 essential or trace minerals that are needed for the body to function properly. So our soil is so depleted, therefore our biome is depleted. When the soil is depleted, so is the animal that eats it, so is the plant that grows in it. If you looked at a soil lineage study from the 50s and compared it to today, you would see that they're night and day. So a lot of us are mineral deficient. I take a salt, it's dirt cheap, called Baja Gold sea salt. I think a $10 bag of this will probably last you 5 years. I put that in water and I stir it up and I whack it back. The second thing you could do is take a methylated multivitamin. You don't have to take mine, but a methylated. What does methylated means? It means that vitamin, the nutrients in that vitamin, the compounds in there, have already been broken down, assuming your body can't convert anything, meaning it's all gasoline. There's no crude oil. There's nothing like folic acid that has to be converted. There's nothing like cyanocobalamin that has to be converted. Assume you can't convert anything and take a methylated multivitamin. That right there will change your life. And then I would, if you're not already, I would switch to a whole food diet. If you really look at the Blue Zone research and longevity research, Dr. Walter Longo's research, or the longevity diet, you'll see that there's no continuity between diets. No, in other words,
explain to us what like a whole food diet is.
Okay, so it is devoid of processed ingredients. So, in other words, if you're in a grocery store, let's say that you don't know how to read a food label, okay, and you pick something up and you want to know if there's a processed ingredient in there. And you turn it around and you read the ingredients. What you should ask yourself is, do I know where to find this ingredient in the grocery store? So I read the first ingredient and it says wheat flour. Oh, I know where to find that. The next one is cane sugar. I can find that. And then it says high fructose corn syrup, or it says polysorbate 80, or it says dexahexapenthenol. Where do I pick that up in the grocery store? Where do I find red dye number 3 and red dye 40? Right? Can I find sodium lecithin? So if you don't know where to get it in the grocery store, that's a highly processed ingredient. You need to understand what they are. You don't need to be able to define them. You don't need to know this is a thickening agent, this is a preservative, this is a petroleum-based dye. That's going to, you don't have to become a citizen scientist. Just basic food labeling, which will tell you that if I can't find, like, where do I find nitrates? Is there a nitrate supplement in the grocery store? Can I buy a can of nitrates? No. Those are all chemical additives that are done in a processing plant that are added to your foods. So that's a fast way to learn how to eat a whole food diet. In the US, I tell all of my patients to shop the perimeter of the grocery store and go down the aisles as infrequently as possible. Right? That's where you're going to find the majority of processed foods. If it's shelf stable for more than 30 days, it's highly processed.
Yeah.
So there are things that we can do to, when you look at centenarianism and hypercentenarianism, you see that, the people that are living the longest, they weren't on keto, paleo, carnivore, pescatarian, vegan, vegetarian, raw food. They weren't on any of these dogmatic diets. It wasn't keto that was extending everybody's life. It was a whole food diet, right? There are no processed ingredients in any of the blue zones. So Sardinia, highest carbohydrate consumption in the world, longest life expectancy. Mediterranean, one of the highest fat consumptions. They eat fatty fish. They eat tons of olive oil. One of the longest life expectancies. If you go to Singapore, it's the highest meat consumption per capita and one of the longest life expectancies. And the French, the hell with the French, because they're screwing up the whole model because they're drinking wine, smoking cigarettes, eating cheese, and they're living forever, right? So,
And they look
like
so pretty, all of them.
French are messed up
Damn
the whole
them.
thing. Damn you! But the idea, the concept is that none of those diets were highly processed diets. You know what? You know what the two non-exchangeables were in the blue zone. By the way, there was continuity in all the blue zones,
Yeah.
and it's not what you think. The two non-negotiables were sense of community and purpose into later in life, and mobility into later in life. In fact, in Sardinia, their life expectancy was directly related to the grade of the slope that they walked up.
Really?
The steeper the slope, the longer the life expectancy. The hypercentenarianism was confined to an area of Sardinia that had the steepest slope.
That's incredible. I want to talk about,
Mobility, sense of purpose, sense of community. Nobody talks about that in lifestyle medicine.
I know.
Nobody talks about connection.
Well, that's the thing.
No,
Connection is it's the biggest thing that we can have. Having
it's medicine.
friends that you can trust and love, and a family. I mean, that, just fills your cup up so much.
So I was a mortality expert for 22 years. And we knew in the mortality space, Sarah, that if you wanted to cut a human being's life expectancy in half at any age, put them in isolation. And the problem is we are isolated in plain sight because we believe that this is connection, right? It's not. There was something called caregiver syndrome and something called broken heart syndrome that we saw in mortality modeling, and it's very real. Couples that have been married for 30, 40, 50, 60 years, one couple dies, 3 weeks later, the other one's gone. The isolation is crushing. And so we're isolated in plain sight, right? We don't really build community and connection any longer. In fact, we've become very despondent. And so that's actually shortening our life expectancy. In the United States, for the first time in recorded history, which is why I'm such a big part of the MAHA movement, the Make America Healthy Again movement with Bobby Kennedy. In America, for the first time in recorded history, my children, of which I have 4, have a shorter life expectancy than I do.
Wow.
Now, not my specific children, because I'm not, but statistically speaking, this generation has a shorter life expectancy than my generation.
Wow.
And so, we've forgotten that connection is medicine. Sleep, hydration, movement are critical. Whole food diets are critical to extending our life. You cannot exercise your way around poor sleep. You can't eat your way around not exercising. And so there's some basic fundamentals of nutrients, movement, sleep. I mean, sleep is our human superpower. And yet it's the most bullied thing in the majority of our schedules. We push sleep around like the stepchild in our life, right? And by that, I mean, you ask most people, when do they go to sleep? Well, whenever I'm done my stuff for the day, and what time do you go to bed? Whenever I'm done, my work. And I have a hard and fast rule. I schedule all of my meetings and travel around sleep and exercise. I can't tell you what a parabolic shift it made in my life to schedule meetings and travel around sleep and exercise.
How many
meetings
hours
and travel
do you
are
sleep?
no longer my priorities. Pardon?
How many hours a night do you get to sleep?
Generally, very close to 8. Last night, which is weird. Let's see what I did last night. I usually get close to 100% sleep scores, but
and do you sleep with like anything?
Last night was 86%. That's a terrible thing for me. But so
do you have any tricks about sleeping, or do you literally just go to sleep?
No. That's the first thing I do in any client that I work with. In fact, one of the things I'm going to teach at the event when I'm there is exactly, what is the best sleep routine to develop for free, right? I mean, I can give you a couple of those. In fact, you know what I'll do for your audience? I'm going to, if you go to my website, which is theultimatehuman.com, I'm going to make sure that your listeners can download. I'm going to make sure they can sign up to be a VIP of mine at no cost.
Yes.
I'll give them 30 days. Once they have access to that, they'll get access for free. In there, I wrote a 30-page sleep guide. It's the ultimate guide to sleep, and it won't cost you anything. It talks about darkening the room, cooling the temperature down. Well, yeah, I do suggest that you spend about $10 on a really good soft cotton eye mask. I teach you about contrast showering. I teach you the type of breath work to use in bed, um, EMF mitigation, all of those things. And I promise I can fix your sleep. And then depending on what type of sleep pattern you have, I'll tell you exactly what supplement to take. Most people are so magnesium deficient that they lay down to go to sleep at night, and as their environment quiets, their mind wakes up. So they're not sleeping, not because they're not tired. They're not sleeping because their mind is awake. And if you actually go to these people
I think that
and you
happens to
say,
me sometimes. Like my body's tired, but then the mind like wakes up.
yeah. So you lay there, it's called rumination, and you ruminate
Yeah.
on the most nonsensical stuff. Like it is
Yes.
not stuff that should keep you up all night. It's like, did I get everything on my grocery list? Did I return that email? Did my belt match my shoes today? You know, what if I had a dinner party? What color dishes would I? It's like,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know, who would I
I'd
invite? I
like.
haven't told
I would
Nancy in
love
a
to
while. And
know
you're like,
though, what breath work do you do before sleep? Is there one that you suggest for everyone?
yeah, there's one that's called Natural Xanax, and it's called Natural Xanax for a reason because it really works.
Yeah.
And it is essentially, and I teach this in the guide, but it is essentially a long, slow inhale through the nose, followed by a 3 to 5 second pause, and then you breathe out through a straw, which is very
Yeah.
important. Pursed lips, like you have a straw in your mouth. You want actually resistance when you breathe out. You actually want carbon dioxide to build up a little bit. Carbon dioxide is the main vasodilator in the human body. I also encourage people to use a visualization technique when they do that. So when you breathe in through your nose, this is going to sound really corny, but I promise you it works. I want you to imagine pulling all the thoughts of your head, breathe them down into your lungs, and hold those thoughts there, and then breathe them out through your mouth. And as you take your next breath, you're like, oh, should I have a dinner party? And then breathe it out through your nose. Oh, did I have anything on my grocery list today? And breathe it out through your mouth, through the straw. And if you do that, I promise you, you will not make it to the 10th breath.
Wow, that's amazing.
You will not make it to the 10th breath. U.S. Special Forces have used that in box breathing for decades to bring down catecholamine levels immediately before a firefight. So they'll get on scene for some type of very specific um, uh, exercise, and before they initiate, they will do these breathwork techniques to lower catecholamines and the stress response. You know, and calm the central nervous system down, move the central nervous system from a sympathetic to a parasympathetic state. A lot of us go to bed in fight or flight. Why? Because we go to bed thinking about the things that we are afraid of during our day. And so there are specific supplements. Again, I put them all in my guide. It's they're off the shelf things I'm sure you can get in Australia that will be game changers for people. But that's the first thing I fix in people's
I want to ask you
habits.
quickly as well about seed oils because you talk about that,
Mhm.
and I just find that area very interesting. What is it with seed oils? Should we be avoiding them? What oils should we be eating instead? I know for me, I eat a lot of coconut oil and olive oil.
Oh, good for you.
Yeah, but I was looking in a can of tuna, like a really high grade, beautiful quality tuna that I was using for a salad the other day, and it's like in olive oil, but then I look and it was like sunflower oil as well. And I'm
Yeah.
like, hold on, this is
So
not what it
the
says.
issue with seed oils
Yeah.
is generally not the plant itself. It's the distance from the seed to the table. So if you take a canola plant, which is also called a rapeseed, by the way, but canola sounds a lot better than rapeseed. Um, so if you take a canola plant, you put it in a commercial press, it comes out gummy. Okay, so then they degum it with something called hexane. Hexane is a very powerful neurotoxin. Once it's degummed with hexane, they then take that oil and they heat it to 405 degrees, which denatures it because seed oils have a low smoke point. So it denatures it and turns it rancid. So now it's putrefied and it smells. So then they deodorize it with something called sodium hydroxide, which is a very powerful carcinogen. So now you've used a carcinogen, a neurotoxin, to degum and deodorize a putrid, rancid oil. And then we take that, and very often we bleach it before we bottle it and we put it on the shelf. Now, if it was in America, the American Heart Association would put a heart healthy label on there just to make it worse, right? So as you're going down the aisle, you'd see a nice, cute little smiling heart with its muscles flexing so that you knew that that was heart healthy. The issue, very often is not the polyunsaturated fatty acid. It is the fact that it is a rancid, neurotoxic, carcinogenic polyunsaturated fatty acid. When those polyunsaturated fatty acids get into the body, they actually oxidize things like cholesterol. Cholesterol is not our enemy. It is not the genesis of cardiovascular disease. That is a complete fallacy. Your level of LDL cholesterol has zero to do with your cardiovascular risk. Your level of oxidized LDL has everything to do with your cardiovascular risk. Cholesterol that doesn't oxidize, that is large, puffy particulate cholesterol, is a marker for longevity, not a marker for cardiovascular risk. Full stop. Not once in 22 years did I see a single centenarian that I processed a death claim on that at the time of their death did not have clinically elevated levels of LDL cholesterol. Not once. So cholesterol gets blamed for so many crimes it doesn't commit. But the point being that the seed oils are these, rancid, putrefied, deodorized, and degummed oils that, and that's what's causing the issue.
Wow. They're wrapping us up here, so I have to go with
Yes.
1 second. But I
I
have.
can't wait to see you, and I
Yes,
can't
I
wait
know.
to
I want to say
with
two things.
friends.
I've got a final question, but before that, you are coming to
Sure.
Australia. You are in Sydney on the 27th of June, Melbourne, where I am, on the 28th of June. It sounds like it's going to be an amazing show. Tell us, high
Can't
level,
wait.
what you'll be talking about.
So I'll be talking about everything that is finding the ultimate human inside of you. How do you unlock the ultimate human that's inside of every single one of us? What nutrient deficiencies will unlock that? How do you fix your sleep? What is the best morning routine? What does a whole food diet look like? Um, what are the simple zero cost or extraordinarily low cost things that we can do to entirely change the trajectory of our life? I'll talk about the research on longevity and anti aging because there's some extraordinarily promising research. If you're alive in 5 years, it will be your choice whether or not you want to live to age 120, possibly 140, but 120 for certain. Um, and so hang on for 5 more years. I'll talk about the impact of the convergence between artificial intelligence, early detection, and big data, and what that means for humanity and what it can mean for you. And then I will open the floor to questions and take any ailment that anyone in that audience or a loved one suffers from, and we will try to discern what raw material is missing from their body that is causing that condition to exist. I really want to just give without the expectation of receipt. I'm no products to sell, I'm no services to sell. I'm there to provide information. I want to add value to the audience. And the best way for me to add value is to find out what is challenging people the most and fix it right from the stage.
Sounds like an amazing show. I will be there. Our final
Great.
question, Gary, what is a life of greatness to you?
A life of greatness to me is a life of significance, not a life of success. It's a life of service. When you say that you've lived a life of significance or you've been successful, like what does it really mean? If
Mm.
you haven't been in service to humanity, have you really left a legacy? And so I believe that um, a life of success or significance is one where you are in service to other people. You know, the greatest shift in my life happened when I stopped chasing being wealthy. My entire life, all I wanted to do was be wealthy, and I never achieved any level of wealth. Um, I finally decided that I would abandon that and just focus on people's well being. And then as a side effect, I became extraordinarily wealthy. So it's like I feel like I live somebody else's life. But uh, so I think you know, it's about being authentic, which is the most attractive. Uh, it is the most attractive frequency in the universe. If you believe in the universal law of attraction, um, and you want to attract abundance, you need to really learn how to be authentic, which means your words are truthful. You believe what you're saying, and so that would be my answer.
Mm. I just want to add in something quickly because it is in line with the podcast. You have, like, you are quite a spiritual person, aren't you? And you, yeah, I mean, how has that affected your life?
I think it's made me realize what's important and what's not. Right. So the first thing that I do every morning after I brush my teeth and sometimes get in a cold plunge, but I go out on my balcony outside, and I do breath work, and I get natural sun onto my skin. But the first thing I do is I purposely uh, drop to my knees, um, and I just say a prayer of thanks. I never ask for anything. I used to pray like it was a wish list for Santa Claus. You know, do you ever write one of
Yeah,
those when you were a
yeah,
kid? And it
yeah.
was like all the stuff you wanted for
Yes,
Christmas.
yes.
That's what my prayers used to be like. They were I was always asking for something. I was always asking God to fix something, to bring something into my life, to show me the way. And I realized that um if I just look around me, there's so much to be grateful for. That the first thing I do is I just bend my knees and I just say thank you and to just express my gratitude. So that's been an enormous shift for me in the level of contentment that I have in my life. I'm extraordinarily content because I recognize the things that I'm grateful for.
That's beautiful. I feel exactly the same way. Gary Brecka, thank you for all the
Oh,
work that you have
you're welcome.
done. And thank you for this beautiful conversation today. I look forward to meeting you when you're in
You're
Melbourne.
welcome. I can't wait to see you in Melbourne. All right. We'll see you
Thank
very
you.
soon.